such great props of, see you guys, look at what we can do when we hunker down and focus, how we can get stuff done. And then the other part of that, patience, back to, other global leadership, saying, yes, we can get it done, but just think about how much better of a job we could do if we actually had the time allotted that we've requested based on, these factors in the time, which it did end up changing. And that just took patience to plant the seed to whoever is influential in it, bring to the table some examples of what it's causing, and you can make big global change, but that stuff doesn't happen overnight. I mean, that takes time, and you do have to have patience and persistence, to not let it go and give up and be like, well, screw it, they're not going to change it anyway, so why even bother? Then you're just quitting, and you can make it. There's so many different ways, but patience is always at the core of leadership for so many reasons. So those are my thoughts this time around.
That's great.
Yeah, for sure. And here's one thing before turning it over to Jeffrey, is how many times were you impatient, couldn't wait to do something or go somewhere, and then something came up that was even more interesting? You were the one that said, hey, can we wait a little while before we leave? To eat tonight or something, and you were the person who was out the door until something amused you or entertained you or showed interest, and all of a sudden it wasn't the time that was impatient, it was your boredom, your unexcitement. I mean, how many times you're at someone's house and you can't wait to get out of there? And it's just not for you. It might be a great thing for everybody else, but either you had enough or whatever. And someone says no, and that's where things get a little hairy, is it doesn't look good. Right? You say, there's nothing here for me, and I'm not having a good time, and I should just leave. But you get into, well, we just got here 30 minutes ago. How can you leave? And that's where you're starting to encourage activities that make other people impatient, but they're afraid to bring up something, just like that gentleman in the restaurant. If it was that significant, that would drive activity, I would think. Or once you keep it to yourself, just keep it to yourself. Someone's a stranger when you meet them, they're going to be a stranger when you leave them. What was the investment in somebody that doesn't care, won't care, and wonders why you care so much about bringing them into something, right? And that could be a course of action where you just say, hey, listen, I'm not getting into it, right? I don't want to engage in this. I'm sorry you're having a hard time. Hope it gets better when you leave here, and that's, the situation, because you can't always, let's work it out. In business, you can't always say, let's get you right here. Let's talk about it until you're comfortable it's like, no, listen, we talked, we shared, here's the direction. In my company, it was always like, I don't care if everybody agrees with what we're about to do. But once we agree to do it, I want everybody behind us like it was your deal. The time for that is over. Now it's the time to move forward. And I think that's a leadership situation. And that's why I'm thinking about making Fridays Leadership Fridays, because you have to take it beyond the word, put it in a silo in a way, right? That everybody who shows up, let's say on a Friday, is a leadership oriented person, is a leadership oriented word. And, now make it a place for leaders, just like Monday might be coaching day, right? And coaches who are really focused on it, because I think everything we're talking about is based on definition, context. If you would have said there was a family emergency, I had to straighten things out with medical personnel for my family, someone was, oh, I understand, right? I mean, or I understand better. So, Jeffrey, trying to be the better person. How do you do the opposite of what happened to you, because if it had that much, let's say, challenge to it, what would be flipping it on its head and saying, if I was in a restaurant walking by somebody, what would have happened if that same person would have said, I really admire your tenacity and your work ethic, and to go through a whole dinner without focused on your food and focused on your text and stuff. I mean, whatever the case, how can you turn that into a positive learning experience for yourself?
Well, it's interesting is as offensive as it was in the moment, it was startling. It wasn't, I can't say it was terribly offensive. It was just startling, right?
Yeah.
How he came at me. But it did make me think about, like, I go like extra out of my way now to make sure I ask permission if I use my phone in any public domain at all. Like that moment comes up.
I wish more people would do that.
Yeah.
I mean, and total side note, and I'm sorry, this time of year, I don't know why, but I've been going to the grocery store lately, and people are on their freaking speakerphone.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't want to hear your conversation about, and it's usually about stuff that has nothing to do with what you need in ingredients. But I just think that's rude.
I dare you one time to put your arms around him and say, since you've included me in your conversation, I'd love to participate.
Right. My name's Kelly. I think we should at least know each other's first names.
Well, and I think that's awareness. But before we get too far, let me bring in some comments. Beverly says, hi, everyone. What great advice, Kelly. Yes, take a step back, like with kids, time out. Adults are big kids. Carol, who is coming on this Wednesday with a really, really fascinating gentleman, Matt Walsh, who's doing some amazing things together. And actually, Carl says this is why patience is a virtue. And I believe it. Beverly is having a little bit problems with comments, but I'm always telling everybody.
For Beverly.
What's that?
I've had issues with comments this week too, for some reason.
Yeah, and I'm like a ping pong ball going from StreamYard to Restream, just dealing with which inefficiency is better than the other inefficiency.
Yeah, always something. Gotta have patience.
Yeah, and it is what it is. And once you understand what it is, your patience changes, right? You've been in a doctor's office, and every time it's 40-minute wait, doesn't surprise you anymore when it's 40 minutes the next time. So it's really the first times that surprise people, like Jeff's experience, or hearing cell phones going on. But the disadvantage so many younger people have today is they don't have context to how it used to be. Because in their life, it's always been, online shopping. It's always been
so fast-paced, right? Because I think patience is also a practice of slowing down, because you've got to get back to being centered and more focused. And I'm not putting everybody in a bucket. But when you're being presented with all the images and content, the way that young people are their entire life, they're wired now differently. It's harder to know when to take a step back and sit and breathe and approach. And they don't have the same interaction with individuals as we did, and really understanding how to deal with human to human in person instead of behind a keyboard or through a text message, because those are completely different approaches. And with a text message or email, this is another thing for patients, is when you read a message, and this goes back to something you said earlier, Don, when we would get an email message, specifically in the workplace, and I would always teach my team this: if you receive an email for whatever reason that upsets you or gets you, jacked, is it really the email or what's going on with you? Because when the CEO is typing you 3 words that just says, get it done, after you've sent them, here's the process that we're going to follow, are we good to go? And he just responds, get it done. He's answering emails from all over the globe. He doesn't have time to sit there and go, wow, thank you for the lovely email. I'm so grateful that you took the time to bullet point this out for me. Him saying get it done is acknowledging you did a great job. If he didn't like what you put together, he would have come back to you with, like, this sucks, you need to redo it. You're interpreting it. You're perceiving their intent based on your mood. And that's the same thing with text messages, because and especially when you don't know the person. How many times have we met people that we've been communicating through electronically, and then you do finally have that phone call or the video conference, and you're like, oh, they're nothing like what I expected. Because we create a tone in the person based on our own perception. And then that is another part of being patient. If I did ever, and I have received some emails that did piss me off over my career, I'm not gonna lie, but I would type an answer and leave it, because if I'm emotional about it, and I can't remember who to give credit for this, but it's a great lesson for everyone and a great takeaway. Walk away from it for a minute or sleep on it, depending on what the situation is. And this works in work and personal life. Because generally, when you're fired up, something is sparked in you, you're probably blind or blinding yourself a bit to what the big picture is. So step away from it, get your patience, because you got to get it back into that center and calm. And then when you read it the next morning or a couple hours later, whatever it is, when you're feeling better after you've taken a walk, what have you, and you still want to send it, then okay. But I guarantee you, and there's so many times that you'll go back and be like, I need to rewrite this. Because once you hit that send button, particularly in corporate America, you can't undo that. And if you write it incorrectly, you're the one that looks like the ass, even if the person who sent it to begin with was. Which bonus tip, when you start an email off with, I don't mean to be a pain, but you've given me the immediate thing to know what the next thing is. You're going to be a pain. So that was a bonus tip. So those are my thoughts this time.
Well, I think, what we're dealing with, because we relate to business so much, is really social situations.
Yes.
And access situations, because when someone comes into your office, and it's not easy to walk into a supervisor's office or someone else and make a time to sit down and talk, is their availability, their interest in listening to you, as opposed to dismissing you. What do you got? Okay, what do we got to do? Okay, do it. Right? I mean, a person didn't learn anything, except this is a pretty abrupt person. They really didn't want to learn more about what I came up with and why I came up with and how I came up with it. So you actually left the person behind and focused too much on the goal at hand. And everybody talks to everybody. And they may not be talking to you like they're talking to each other. I just went in Jim's office. I had 30 seconds before he told me to do whatever I got to do, and I had to get out. I'm not too excited about making another time to talk to Jim. And then pretty soon, just like Kelly's point, someone says, oh, okay, if someone's going to say this isn't going to go good before I even start talking, Jim's already proved it. And all of a sudden you get a reputation. And, one more thing, I remember sending some messages that I was wrestling with, and I sent them, and I still regret them, because of not only what they said, but what they could mean. Because that's the hardest thing, is what was your motive here? What was your purpose? What were you intending me to appreciate or not hear? And I always like to, if it's important, let's have a call, let's meet. I think this is too important just to be texting back and forth. So Jeff, it seems like communication is essential for everything. How to get better at it as a collective.
Well, let me break it down a little bit. We said that perseverance is a close cousin to patience, but so is long suffering. In the sense that, hey, sometimes we have to endure that moment where we know. I think one of the comments in here was the fact that as we are trying to share our knowledge with somebody, they aren't where we are, right? And so part of the long suffering is that patience, or that long suffering of allowing them to catch up to where we are, or for us to take the time and go back 3 or 4 or 5 steps to where we used to be, and walk with them in the journey to where we are going, right? And so I think that, and one of the actual definitions I pulled is out of Strong's dictionary, is steadfastness, constancy, endurance, not swerved from a deliberate purpose. In this case, it's in the context of biblical, so it's not swerved from a deliberate purpose, and loyal to faith even through the greatest trials and sufferings. Right? So if you think about like patience, it means that there's probably a toll of some sort that you have to undergo. There is a trial, a suffering, or something that you're not necessarily enjoying in that moment, but you're doing it deliberately because you know that there's something else on the other side of this that I must get to, and my patience required to go through that to get to the other side. And I thought that was really illuminating as I was reading that.
Yeah, that is interesting. And you know, there's so many things about this, and it's funny because there's one person that I think about my entire career who was like just the thorn in my side for the longest time. Excuse me, but he was also a great big lesson to me, and how I turned that for myself. And he was one of these guys that everybody, I won't say it was just me, he was a problem in the organization. He was the cancer. He was that executive that should have been fired so many times, and it caused such issue with the organization, because when that happens, other people start to go, well, why am I working so hard when this jackass is still here and is in this high and doesn't meet the level of work, you know, and doesn't have, why is he still here? And it's such a thing for everyone else, and a lot of organizations don't realize that, but I always knew he's got to have some value in some way for them to keep him. And a lot of people don't understand, in an organization, some executives, they plan way in advance to get rid of them. It's not like they know they're a problem. And sometimes they have to have an exit strategy for this person that is a long-term thing to make happen. Because this guy in particular, he was one of those that he kept everything he didn't share enough information. And that to me is always a little bit of a red flag, because it's like, or he would have tools that he used that he knew that other executives didn't understand. So he would talk about it and with all these big words, and people would just take his word for it. Like, okay, well, that's his gig, so he's taking care of it. But really later, when we pulled back all the layers, like, he was so full of BS, and people always eventually get exposed. You can only fake it for so long. But his challenge to me was how he treated people, because he was just a rude, totally disrespectful to women specifically. I used this example on another show. He was the guy that would have meetings in his office and have his back to you on his computer and make you sit there and wait for him. And that's just so rude. And it's a control play. But when I turned my mindset and had the patience, because, man, I did want to yell at him several times, just for how he was to my team, more so even than myself, because I was able to at least say, as another executive, after so many minutes, I'd be like, hey, guess what? We needed this full 30 minutes. So if we've got to reschedule, I'll come back. But subordinates were afraid of him, so they didn't want to say anything in fear of getting in trouble. But when I changed my mindset of, this is about him, has nothing to do with any of us. There is some major pain center in there, and insecurity, and talking with my team about that and helping them change their mindset and being like, he's not trying to upset you. He's trying to feel better about himself. Yeah. And it doesn't make it okay, but it helps your own understanding and have patience to be, because why are we getting so riled up when someone else is coming at us? And one, it's probably triggering something in us, because there were certainly some behaviors in him that were triggers for me. From a domestic violence situation. And I always look at things that when they're making me uncomfortable, what lesson am I supposed to learn here? Because this is being presented to me for a reason. And he was one of my tests of patience, and how do I plan on participating in this situation? Because again, to go back what I said earlier, you can't have conflict unless you participate. And I chose to take the higher road. And it is fascinating because he ended up very much liking me in the sense of he had such respect for me in work, outside of work, because I was involved in some nonprofits that he was in, and he had no idea that I was involved in. And it was just fascinating how his mind shifted, or how his way of treating me changed over time, because it does kind of go to that whole thing, or it does go to that whole thing of people treat us how we allow them to treat us. But sometimes in the workspace, it's a little bit different, because I couldn't quit him. I had to deal with him on the regular. And so, yeah, you have to adjust, but it does take patience when there's other people that make the process difficult. Because he was also another one of those people within the critical path. He was always the speed bump, or one of the biggest ones. And it was just so annoying, because you always knew it was coming. Oh, great. Now it's in his department. How long is it going to take before we get it now? But then learning how to judge, hey, just being where you are, what can I do to help speed up the process? How can I help you in any way? So yeah, and that was a patience process for me to learn how to handle this difficult human being. And we've all had those people, I think, in the workplace, or even on our teams, the people who do the bare minimum just because they know they can get by. The ones that are at their desk at 8:00 and they're ready to leave. They've got all their stuff put together at 5 to 5 so that they can be out the door at 5. When other people are pushing harder, and how do you have the patience of a leader to manage your team as individuals? Because of course, then you have that problem within the team. Well, why isn't he doing as much as I am? I was doing this. I did all of this, and they only did this. Again, it goes to people, and that's why a lot of people don't like leadership or management, though, because they're like, I don't want to deal with that stuff with people, because people are a pain sometimes, especially in a group. And the bigger your team, the more patience you need to have. I mean, that's just a fact.
See, that was fun to me. That was the best part of leading for me, because I felt like it was like this big puzzle. I was constantly solving this humongous puzzle. And the more complex it was just like I just got into it. I would be like, oh, this is how do I, this person is absolutely hating on this other person. This looks like a great opportunity for me to inject a little oil in the relationship.
Yes. So fun.
Well, I think one other element is we're not really talking total purity here, because a lot of patience is determined by outside issues like litigation, right? You've got a person who you want to say goodbye to, but you got to look at documentation, right? You have to look at what's your reason and what do you have to back it up. So if you're not doing write-ups or reviews or something that says, hey, we tried remedial efforts, we tried talking with this person, here's signed statements they made that they accepted responsibility for this. And then what do they have on you and the company? So, it's a two-way street. If a lot of people are acting just like the person they don't like anymore, and that happens too. They're a great worker, they do everything right, but they're not a likable person. They just go in, do their stuff, don't want to get too involved in anything outside of it. And to some people, that's not good enough, Jeff.
Quick insert. Do you mind if I give a plug to this week's show on growing your business with people? Would that be okay? The reason I say that is because Claire Chandler was my guest on the show, and her her pseudo title is a leadership therapist, right? And really, she deals with exactly these types of issues on a regular, everyday basis, right? It's the fact that we are constantly, as leaders, our job is almost as a bit of a therapist, in the sense that our job is to create oil in the system, right? We are constantly navigating difficult relationships, either amongst our team, between ourselves and other people, between ourselves and our seniors, to be able to get things done. And so Claire Chandler was an awesome guest, and it was a really phenomenal interview for that. And I just got a kick out of the fact that her title was that she calls herself as leadership therapist. That made me laugh.
So true.
Well, I think that's really the key, and that's why definition goes a long way towards not having a lot of misunderstandings. You know, putting the time up front for proper orientation, for proper acclimation, for not letting someone not know what the protocol is in advance or not understand that, because again, whose responsibility? We used to make the first day at work the same as the last day. Well, I say, you know, on the last day we'd have a retirement get together, mainly cake and ice cream and stuff. On the first day we'd have a cake for the person, right? To celebrate their entry into the company, because that's their first day. It might be your 12th year of doing what you're doing, but it's their first day. And how did you feel on your first day? Probably a little uncomfortable, probably wondering who's this and who's that and what does that mean? And, you know, I think the other thing about patience is buying those vowels before you solve the puzzle, right? Because someone comes across and you say, well, I don't know about that person. My first impression was, but then if you give it time and you see that that wasn't really who they were, you know, it was your snap picture or photo of them that you developed. And where is the speed to action? Because you can't go to inaction after you've done that. But I want to recognize Linda, who writes a lot and does so well. And still, when it comes to relying on object, cars, internet, my dad always said, if we didn't have them, wouldn't have the issues, but to appreciate all we have possible. Well, you know, you're only as big as the fishbowl you swim in. And you have less to deal with. You probably deal with it with more thought, more time, and more patience. But I think because now this has gotten to be the, you know, slide a picture, right? Slide a post. You just keep sliding and doing this. You're into like fast, you know, like you got 5 seconds and then you're bored by that article you just put on the screen, or you don't have time to really share a lot, so you just throw out a directive. You know, someone asks you about something, you say, yeah, for sure. I mean, and what does that mean? I don't know. And I think if you just compile a mountain of these cryptic messages, you know, then it just shows you're not really deep anymore. You're wide, you're fast, but you're not focused. And at a certain point, where does humanity show up? Right? When is the time to be together, not just to tell each other stuff or show each other stuff or require so much stuff? So, you know, I think a lot of companies and organizations would be better to continue to maybe train for patience, not for fast action, not for reaction, you know, because again, if you're dealing with a brand, you're dealing with an organization, a couple bad slips ups on social media, and all of a sudden you got yourself a whole lot of things going on. So we're coming up on top of the hour. Here we go. Okay, you bet. Yes, true, and is sad when someone takes credit for himself instead of a team or person who shared thoughts with you. There's so many ways to be a disservice to so many people.
Oh, yeah.
If you just fall right into the mode, but the leader is the one to take the higher ground. The leader is the one to accept responsibility. I made a mistake. I make a lot of mistakes, but I try really hard. Beverly comes back with great. Yes, I think all organizations.
Totally agree.
You know,
every organization should have either a therapist or a business coach. They would have so much more productivity. And I mean, it's an investment in your team and for their health, whether it's mental health, physical health, all those things. The fact that more organizations don't do this these days is mind blowing to me. It just seems like a failed item to add to your strategy in order to have a better culture. Because again, culture is one thing they always say is a top 3 thing that they care about, but it's one of the least things that they have on their. They don't have a line item for a budget for it. So how can it be that important if you're not doing anything for it?
That's right.
Well, yeah, well, and I think too is because it's not a direct relationship to making money, right? I mean, if you tell somebody go out and do something, you think maybe something will get done and there'll be some value. If you say go out and help yourself,
Mhm.
you know, how many people don't let people be on LinkedIn, you know, and build their own brand while building the company's brand? And the other
Yeah.
thing I learned about LinkedIn, there's so many wonderful coaches and therapists who are right at hand,
Mhm.
who are looking to get involved. So you got a huge supply, you got a huge demand, but it is the leadership who decides, hey, I'm going to do something for the team. Indirectly, it might help the company. I mean, when
I know
I got in the
Jeffrey's
weight loss, what's that?
I'm sorry. I know Jeffrey's got to run at the top
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
hour.
So anyways, Jeff, last thoughts on patience. Thanks for the word, and last thoughts for the crowd.
Well, I just thought I'd leave you with this. I used to want to be a doctor, but I couldn't get any patients. If you couldn't leave it on a funny note on a Friday, then what could you do, right? Thank you very much, Don. Thank you very much, Kelly. This has been an awesome conversation made possible by you guys, and most importantly, the audience here, who's been a wonderful contributor. So just want to say thank you, and hopefully everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thanks for having the patience for an hour to leave it with a good thought, and that's an important element. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week, and in the meantime, it'll be me and Kelly saying goodbye to Kelly. Jeffrey, it's been great. I know you got to run. And
Gotta go. Cheers. Thank you.
You bet.
Yep.
Thank you. Kelly, your final thoughts.
Yeah. So, of course, great conversation. I love this stuff. I could talk leadership, I think, for days with all of this. But I think I want to wrap up with going back to what Christy started in the very beginning about, you never know what's going on in someone else's mind when they do something with our patients. And this is a little good mind shift or way to look at things is, when you're on the freeway or whatever, and there's that person that cuts you off and, your reaction is like, what a jerk. It seems to be the first thing to say, but look at it as like, maybe they're trying to get to the hospital because their wife is having a baby or someone's ill or they had an emergency. You don't know what's going on in that other person's mind. And yeah, it may seem rude to you or how they're behaving may seem rude to you, but you have no idea. If you don't have the opportunity to, obviously, you can't ask a person in a car, what's your issue? Or, you can only have conflict if you participate. You choose how it will go. If you're annoyed by the person in line that's going slow, your response to that is what is going to make it go either good or bad. And if you're in a mindset where you think everything is going to be bad because you don't like this person, it will be bad because your mindset, you will pick every piece of information to feed that belief. And likewise on the positive side, if it's going to go well. So take some responsibility yourself, have a dose of patience. I know we all need it over this holiday season. Because like I said, I just feel like people get more rude and I don't know why. It's like, tis the season of love. I mean, in my opinion. So super fun conversation today. Happy Black Friday to everyone. And again, if you're going out shopping, take a dose of patience. And like I always end, everyone, please go out and shine so bright that others can't help but shine too.
Well, I'll end that on your ending note. I think it was a quality conversation. And it did examine patience in so many ways and shows that it can be a virtue and not a challenge if you identify. And I guess one last thing is if you do have issues with certain things, it doesn't hurt to share that up front. If someone being late a minute it really makes a difference, you can say, I'm really a stickler for punctuality. If you can and you reinforced it, because some people say, well, what's a minute or two?
Yes.
At least you can say, I told you up front what it was. So thank you. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow we've got Leslie Flowers and Catherine Chadwick. It's been a couple weeks since they reunited, and it only gets better. So appreciate it. Hope everybody is getting over all their leftovers today and football and whatever goes with the day after Thanksgiving. So thank you, Kelly, especially. And